In fact, besides my original passion, the greatest thrill that I ever had in my life is when you look at a game that you've created. Like, to this day, when I look at people playing Warcraft 3, for example, where I wrote every little bit that had to do with the unit behavior, you know, from the formation behavior, all the logic, all this stuff. When other people play it, it's just such a thrill. It's different. It's, you know, you're watching them, and you can almost see the architecture that you put in place, executing underneath, you know, their fingers. And there's nothing more thrilling. I mean, when you think there are millions of people, there are probably hundreds of thousands of people playing the games that I worked on today. And it's just astonishing. Actually, millions if I can't count World of Warcraft. You know, I always think about that. I mean, someone is running my code right now. They don't know it, but it's mine. It's an incredible satisfaction. There's nothing quite like it. Music will be the same way. If I'm not writing symphonies that people buy and adore and love, it's not the same thing. Yeah, it sounds good to me, but it's not the same level. Music certainly was my original passion. I started studying as a child. I started when I was 4.5 years old. And immediately I had some real gifts. This is genetic. I had a really big hand that worked well. And I had a natural way of decomposing music into patterns, which helped me memorize long scores very easily. And it's a big thing for someone who has to, you know, go through life playing music. It's quite an important thing. By the time I was about 7, 8 years old, it seemed like the future was already set. I was going to be a concert pianist. That was going to be it. Unfortunately, when I got to around 8 years of age, I started doing weird things with the music. I would be studying my pieces, and then all of a sudden, I would memorize the structural pattern, the melody, and then I would start making variation or approximating the piece as opposed to playing it back exactly the way it was written. And I still remember just one particular incident one day with my teacher. We were playing one of the Bach fugue, I believe it was. And at some point I said to her, you know, if I had been Bach here, I would have done this instead. And she was not happy about that. I think she went on for about 10 minutes saying, if you were Bach? If you were Bach? I think it was the most blasphemous thing she had ever heard in her life. Still, people thought it was kind of charming that I would want it to be, you know, writing my own things and making variations and stuff at the beginning, but soon my teachers were irritated. And soon after that, I started thinking that having that seed was no longer a requirement for me to make music. And I started improvising more and more. I fancied myself a composer. And things in my head sounded different. As much as I loved the repertoire, you know, the things that I created in my head sounded better to me. It was like in my childhood, you know, even my stupid little pieces sounded like Mahler's Second, or you know, it was. There's just something different about the act of creation compared to performing. So I knew then already that I did not want to be a concert pianist. I wanted to be a composer. But my teachers were not thrilled. I did not tell anybody. It was not really, you know, we did things. My father took me to places to check out my composing things and everything else. But I did not actually really fully explain to my teachers until I was about 12. And obviously on some level, they already knew, because at 12 years of age, if you're supposed to be a concert pianist, that's when you're it, you know. You're just driving. You're studying all day. If you guys have ever known people who, you know, start as little children, they're supposed to become, you know, concert pianists or something like that. By the time they're 12, it's just study all day, and just the goal is so clear. They're just there, you know. The only obstacle is life until you're ready to go and be what you're supposed to be. So for them, it was like a composer. It was like saying, okay, that's it, you know. All of the projected hopes they had, you know, because, you know, some guys seemed like they could have a good future. All of that vanished. All of their projected hopes for greatness and future, you know, when they came on stage and I thank them when I get my award, you know, thank my teachers and all this stuff. All of that was gone. So things dried off very quickly. And my studying changed. A lot of emphasis changed from less piano and more composition. During this time, also I discovered my intense love for the theater, for music combined with fiction, which in my opinion is one of the truly great achievements of Western culture. When I was about 13, I was actually almost 14, 2 months before turning 14, and I've talked about this a little bit briefly before. I still have, although it's been 30 years, a very difficult time talking about this stuff. But when I was almost 14, my father died. Very sudden, very fulminating death, thanks to cancer, for the smokers in the house. He was perfectly healthy around Christmas time, and by March 13th, he was killed by cancer. And for a 13-year-old, this is one of those things in life where, you know, all of a sudden your childhood is over, life begins to truly, really suck. And the scars that I got from that lasted probably, I did not really find peace until I was in my mid-30s, I would say. And I'm convinced, again, and this is back to my point, that this was a critical aspect of my character that allowed me not to become, you know, because I was truly suicidal and I had lost all interest and I thought I was, you know, cursed. Nothing made any sense. That age is very difficult to, it's almost the worst possible age to be faced with those kind of challenges. As a child, you have time to recover psychologically and deal with it by the time you're a teenager. Being a teenager is already hard as it is. When you're this way is really terrible. All my anger, my frustration, all the pain, I channeled into my passions, particularly music and then computers. And what saved me was the fantasy, fiction, the ability to, you know, leave the reality and the grayness of my daily life and escape with games, with music and poetry into other things. At this time, I also, for the first time, got to work with computers, Apple IIs with the Alpha Centauri cards they had. This was the early 80s, and I saw these for the first time at the conservatory. It was mind-blowing. You could do, you know, wave shaping with these things. Of course, by today's standards, they were incredibly primitive. But back then, it was the state of the art in electronic music. And as soon as I started playing with those computers, I knew that that's what I wanted to explore, and I wanted to be able to get the machine to do more. I was also at the Classical Lyceum, which greatly added to my depression. I don't know how things are now in Italy, but back then, it was truly one of the worst things that you could put a kid through. I was not doing very well. And I really cherished my image of the cursed poet. I managed to go through the first year in spite of not giving a crap about what was going on. By the second year, it was really, really bad. I ditched school most of the time. I would go and spend the day in a park where girls would come and take dictation on my poetry. And the nights, you know, it was spent with computers and mathematics. And I really cherished my image of the cursed poet. I was going to die soon. And, you know, I worked at it really hard. Really got the girls. And until one day when my school called and told my mother that I hadn't been in school for over a month. My mom, which was already, as you can imagine, not exactly in great health, reached a new level of desperation. And in spite of all of that, I requested something crazy to my mom. I wanted a computer. I wanted an Apple II with the Alpha Centauri thing, in spite of the fact that we were financially ruined, and I might as well have asked her for a flux capacitor, because the word computer made absolutely no sense to her. She still sensed that there was potential there, and since she was desperate anyways, somehow she found a way to get the money and bought me my first computer. And it was like an instant fever. And just like it was with music, immediately I wanted to program the thing. I wanted to get to the base of it. Running other people's games, and the first thing I did was music stuff, but immediately I discovered games. Other people's games were fun, but the stuff that I wrote satisfied my passion in a completely different way. Especially because these were the first personal games. I had been in the arcade, of course, back in the early days of the arcade, but these were the first truly personal games that you played at home on computer. 2 games back then particularly changed my passion. The first one was Elite by David Braben, Ian Bell. This game was absolutely revolutionary in its time. It was the first open world, actually open universe, You could, you would have your ship, you could play the game however you wanted. You could travel around 8 galaxies, each one filled with thousands of systems, each one with its planets, and you could trade slaves if you wanted to, you could be a criminal, you could be a pirate, you could do absolutely anything you wanted. It was mind-boggling, and it was 3D graphics. It was 1984. Of course, 3D graphics, vector graphics like that and everything else, by today's standard, there is absolutely nothing, but the flight of fancy, the impact on the imagination was just as vivid and just as strong. Some people who just don't see it the same way. For me, it's the same thing with music. Particularly when you take music and you put it in context as opposed to having music just on itself. When you add the dramatic element, it achieves a level that is just almost unbearable. There are operatic pieces that I have such a strong physical reaction to them, between the chills and the tears and the stuff that I feel embarrassed when I listen to them in front of other people. It just shakes you so violently between the recognition of the beauty of the artistic piece and the added layer of the drama, the human element that is in it. And it's the same thing with games. There are some people who play games and they live those stories. They feel the impact of the fiction that the author has put in the game. And in the case of something like Elite, it's your own. And there are others that don't. Others that listen to Othello and go, yeah, okay, I don't get it. And it's fine. People are different. But it's an important thing to remember when you watch other people play your games, because there might be those that just don't get moved the same way as you do. I certainly was moved too much, The other game that really shaped those years for me was Karateka by my friend Jordan Mechner. This was completely the opposite of Elite. It was short, totally scripted, and it was the first game to use rotoscoping. It was all hand animated, and had it really felt like an operatic event. It was less than 45 minutes from beginning to end. I think I played it, 100 times. It was the first game to have a real dramatic evolution in it. There was actual character development. And I don't know, has anybody here ever played Karateka? Yeah? Remember when there was the camera doing that thing where it would show first the guy running, then the other guy running, then the other running, then the other running. There were all kind of these incredible ideas that when you think about it now, you probably wouldn't even do them right now because you were still interacting. So the gameplay side of things was seriously sacrificed to enhance the cinematic feel of it. But it was just such a revolutionary game that had a profound impact. It showed me the range that our art really had. Between Elite and Karateka, they could not be more different. And at the same time, they were both running on my computer. They were both games. And it showed me just the extent and the huge abyss of possibilities that existed between the two of them that needed to be explored. And they also showed me that I wanted to be a part, at least, of the creation of these pieces of fiction. So I'll skip the rest of my years. The rest of my teenage years, I did all kind of crazy stuff. But like I said, I'm done talking about my life. The crucial thing was a lot of learning. I just spent all my time learning as much as possible. Computers, mathematics, physics, the usual stuff. If you guys think that now, making games in Italy stuff, just imagine in the 80s, where there were like a handful of people that even knew what we were talking about. There was no internet, there was no means of communication. Getting books, even just from the US, was incredibly difficult. It was just impossible to imagine yourself being part of that world. It was like you were on a different planet. I was in Busto Arsizio, of all places, the butthole of the universe. And I'm, struggling to try to learn everything about this. And these games come to me from places that seem literally to be a million miles away. It's the idea, the very notion of being part of that is as foreign as, if you're watching a movie, can you really picture yourself being in the lead role? And I don't mean just as a fantasy, as a realistic opportunity. Can you watch a movie with, Leonardo DiCaprio and think, yeah, I could be that guy? It's very difficult. It's very tough.